Well, hey everyone, welcome to episode 3 now of our Midweek Conversation, where you and I get another opportunity to communicate with our amazing community on the topics and the questions that you guys have sent us that we are actively digging into and studying. And I don't know, the first 2 episodes, we had a blast.
Yeah, it was incredible.
Talking about the church, talking about church culture, church hurt, the good, the bad, the ugly. It was a lot of fun getting to just dive into that and having some really open, transparent conversation. And yet we're ready to move into the next topic today. And I know you and I have been talking a lot about this next topic and even doing a lot of reading and listening to podcasts on this. So I know we're excited to dive in.
Yeah, I'm excited because it's something that I've been walking, like you just mentioned, walking in a little bit. And I've seen growth in myself through that. And so I'm really excited to dive into it. And I'm also looking forward to diving into it because I think it's just something that's so needed.
Yeah.
I think that we have a lot of us Christians that struggle with feelings of emptiness when it comes to our spiritual life.
Yeah.
Like this feeling disconnected on and off far more than we would like. And I think today we're going to be diving into a little bit of some tools that we can grab hold of to help us change from those feelings of just like not having purpose in my ministry or my spiritual walk, or just like I said, the emptiness that we feel.
Yeah.
And honestly, I feel very empathetic for us as a church body, because I think so many of us feel this way more than we would like or like to admit.
Yeah, and I think, and maybe we'll talk more about this here in a bit, but I think so many of us have come to believe certain things intellectually in our minds, but we're really frustrated because we're not seeing any change or transformation in our hearts. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
Like, okay, we've adopted this new information, and yet my life hasn't changed. I'm not any more loving. I'm not any more patient. I'm still bitey with my wife and my kids, and I'm not making an impact in the people's lives around me. I think all of us can relate to that experience.
For sure. I mean, I know I can. I know that just in these past, few months or however long we've been kind of diving into it for ourselves, I feel like I'm stepping into something that maybe I just haven't had a good grip on my whole life. I've been a Christian my whole life. But I do think that so many days we just walk through the motions.
Yeah.
We're just going through the motions of life, and we're just kind of wandering about, and we don't have anything that we're going toward or we're stepping into. And so we're left with this feeling of emptiness.
Yeah, we're not truly intentional with the direction that our lives are headed in.
Yeah.
I think so many of us would have to say that. So what we're talking about today is the concept of spiritual disciplines. I've heard it called spiritual formations, spiritual practices, but it's all in the same neighborhood. And I do want to call out, before we dive into this, an amazing resource on this topic is Practicing the Way by John Mark Comer. An amazing resource. If you haven't yet read that, go and buy it, read it. It will change your mind on so many different things. And John Mark is just an amazing author who puts things in such a practical way that it feels like you can actually walk in it. And so a lot of things we're going to discuss today come from that resource. And so I wanted to call that out for those that want to dig in even deeper. And of course, we have a class going on right now within our community of people who are walking through that together, and I know growing along the way. So wanted to call that out. But when we talk about spiritual disciplines, when we say that word and those phrases, can you maybe just start by clarifying what that means on the surface, at least?
Yeah, well, it's really the intentional action or plan even that we are putting in place, the structure that we need to go from the knowledge, the head knowledge of what it means to be a Christian, and the desires that we have to be closer to Jesus, and now being able to actually realize what that looks like and who we are becoming through that and how we're being formed, into his likeness.
Yeah. So it's the rhythms and the habits that we put in place in our lives to point us in a particular direction, right? That's ultimately what we're talking about. And so many of these things we discuss every weekend or every week in life group, things like prayer and reading scripture and worship. These are spiritual disciplines. They're pointing us in a particular direction. And in our next episode, we're going to jump into some of those specific practices and what those mean and how we can better walk in those. But I think today we just want to hit this from a high-level standpoint. What are these about? What's the purpose of them? How can we begin to walk in them so that we can be transformed in the process?
Yeah. And things like prayer and reading the Bible, don't check out on us because I'm sure if you've been a Christian for any period of time, you've heard that. But don't check out on us, because I can tell you that there's been life that's come for me and my life recently just by diving into some of these things. And so I don't want to lose, the group and just saying, oh, we're talking about prayer again. No, like we're going to talk about it in some ways that will lead us to practicing it more so.
Yeah.
But so we've talked about what is spiritual disciplines. What are we talking about? But you mentioned purpose. So what is the why behind having spiritual disciplines or formations in our life?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things come to mind for me initially. And the first one is spiritual disciplines, first off, give us an opportunity to just spend time with God, to just be with God, be content in his presence. And the truth is, going back to what you said earlier, so many of us are just going from thing to thing to thing. We're so distracted. We're so consumed with everything else going on that even if we say we're followers of Jesus, we rarely, if ever, just spend time with God. Just give him our time and our attention. And so that's one of the first things that comes to mind. It anchors us in that. And the other thing that comes to mind is spiritual practices align us with our deepest core values, right? Like it centers us on what we believe to be most important. Because let me put it this way. Every single one of us, we are following somebody in this life.
Yeah.
We're following something. And whatever we're following is going to shape and form us in a particular way. It's going to shape and form how we think. It's going to shape and form our worldview. It's going to shape and form our values. That's happening actively in every single one of our lives. Another way to put it is we're all practicing spiritual disciplines.
Yeah.
Like scrolling through social media is a spiritual discipline. Binging Netflix is a spiritual discipline. Going to the bar every Friday night is a spiritual discipline. The question is, what direction is that pointing you in? How are those things forming and shaping you? And what type of person are you becoming as a result of those disciplines? And so if we talk about as Christians being true followers of Jesus, what we're saying is we have to be intentional about putting the rhythms and habits in our everyday life in place to form and shape us in his image. Because guess what? That's not just going to happen by accident. We're not going to get to like 60 years old and just stumble our way into being a loving and selfless and generous and patient person. It's not just going to happen. We have to be intentional in order to go in that particular direction. And so spiritual disciplines center us. They ground us in what we believe to be most important.
Yeah, and I think it's important to call out because we were talking about honestly, it's just so easy to wander about through life.
Yeah.
We are naturally going to gravitate toward what is easiest, most comfortable, most convenient. And many times that leads us to watching TV or scrolling, through social media and watching a bunch of videos, guilty as charged. But that is what we're going to just naturally gravitate toward. We live in a world where companies spend billions and billions of dollars to capture our attention and our focus and our time, to then form us and guide us to whatever it is that they're trying to accomplish, buying their product or service, whatever that is. And so that is happening, and many times subconsciously to us, but that's the gravitational pull that's happening for us.
Right.
Where we're just kind of going about whatever is leading us and guiding us. We're falling into stream with that.
Yeah. It makes me think of Romans chapter 12, verse 2, right? Paul says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your minds, so that you may be able to discern what is the will of God, what is good and pleasing and complete. In other words, what he's saying is, you are either being conformed to this world or being transformed into Christ's likeness. One of those two things is actively happening in your life. And so if you want to go into the Christ likeness direction, you are going to have to be ultra intentional about doing that. That's going to take effort. That's going to take habits. It's going to take practices to push you in that direction. It makes me think about the quote, your system is perfectly set up to give you the result that you're getting.
Yeah.
It's the same way in our spiritual lives. So guess what? If you're a person who is constantly angry and who is impatient and who lacks self-control, the habits and rhythms and structure in your life is perfectly set up to give you that result and continue to give you that result. But if you want to be like Jesus and you want to be more loving and more full of grace and patience, you're going to have to change that structure. You're going to have to change that system in order to accomplish what you want to really accomplish.
Yeah. You might be wondering, why do I feel like this? Why do I keep doing this? And sometimes we get stuck in that, talking about being stuck and stagnant where we're at spiritually. Well, what we're saying is, let's go upstream a little bit and look at, what's leading to this, because the systems and structure, whether intentional or not, is what's leading to that result. I love Romans 12 too, because, this is written 2,000 years ago. And back then, sometimes we talk about, this year, this era is different. This, nowadays things are different, but Scripture is still so real and live to what we're dealing with. But to be conformed, to just fall into line with what's happening in the world, just fall into line, or are you going to be transformed? And how many times have so many friends and family of ours, Christians, said, I want to know God's will for my life. I want to be able to hear his voice more clearly. And so we're saying these things and feeling stuck in this kind of way. If I just knew what he wanted me to do.
Right.
Well, what we're saying is, be transformed, renew your mind through spiritual disciplines that will lead to hearing his voice, knowing his will for our life. And so but we must be intentional in order to do that.
It makes me think of maybe my favorite chapter in the Bible, John 15, where Jesus says, abide in me and I will abide in you. He says, apart from me, you can do nothing, right? But if you abide in me, then you'll bear my fruit. And it just makes me think, whatever we're producing in life shows us what we're abiding in. So if we are producing love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and generosity and faithfulness and self-control, we know we're abiding in the very presence of God. But let's be honest. Can we just be transparent about it? The truth is so many of us, we are bearing fruit of greed. That's what's most important to us, to consume and to gain. We're bearing fruit of impatience and a lack of grace for the people around us. bearing fruit of selfishness. All we care about is ourselves and our well-being. And all we have to do is, to your point, go upstream and look at what we're abiding in. What are we abiding in? What story are we abiding in? What people are we abiding in? And it becomes really clear at that point why we're producing the fruit that we are. And I guess for me, my plea with all of us would be, if we say we're following Jesus, we have to abide in him. We have to abide in him if we're going to be the people he's called us to be.
We'll bear his fruit. You know, when we abide in him, we will bear his fruit.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more about the direction you're taking here. And we mentioned this at the beginning, but one of the, I think, big issues that we see in our modern Western Christian culture is that we have the intellectual knowledge. Many of us have an amazing amount of it to where we can, spit out scripture like it's the back of our hand. Mm-hmm. But there seems to be a disconnect between this and then getting it into our body and acting it out. Mm-hmm. And so can you maybe just talk a little bit more about that as it relates to spiritual practices? Because I think that's a big piece of this.
Yeah, so I think I've grown up in church my whole life, right? And I've heard countless sermons. I have listened to so many sermons on YouTube, read the Bible. I've continually just gained the head knowledge.
Yeah.
But I've struggled to then take that from head knowledge and to actually live it out.
Yeah.
And like I said, many times the desire was there too, but there was this disconnect between knowing, wanting, and then doing. Mm-hmm. So I know that, for me, sometimes I would be sitting in situations, even like small group, life group, and I would know the right answer, but in my heart know that I need to live this out better.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can relate with that at all, but.
Yeah, well, here's what I'm thinking, just to put it very clearly. To be a Christian is not simply to believe in a set of doctrines or a set of truths. To be a Christian is an invitation from Jesus to come and follow me, mm-hmm. right? To deny yourself, pick up your cross, and come and follow me. In other words, the Christian life, the Christian lifestyle, is not simply about adopting information. It is a fully embodied way of living. It's something that gets into our heart and into our bones and into our bodies to where we live it out, right? And we need practices and habits and rhythms in order to ultimately accomplish that. Mm-hmm. In the Practicing the Way book, John Mark says something like, following Jesus is less like learning calculus and more like learning jujitsu. Meaning it's not about just downloading information. It's about learning something that gets into your body and affects the way that you move and changes the way that you operate. That's what Christianity is, and that's the invitation from Jesus. I think it's so important that we understand the difference between the two.
Yeah, to the point where it becomes our muscle memory of being like him. And the practices help us start taking those steps. It starts building that into us to the point where practice leads to, I don't even have to think about it anymore. This is who I am. This is what I do. That's the kind of stuff that we're talking about. We are the body of Christ.
Yeah.
John Mark said something in the book about Jesus doesn't have a body on earth except yours, or something along those lines. Like, we are the body of Christ. We must do. He said, as he's about to die, he says, now go and do what I have been doing, and you're going to have a helper to help you.
Yeah. I think one of the big issues, if we're being honest, when it comes to this topic of why we often have this disconnect between our head and our bodies and our actions is because we don't really know the gospel message. We don't really know the good news of what Jesus came and did. And it's honestly something you and I have been talking a lot about lately. But I think if you were to ask most Christians, what's the gospel? They would say, well, Jesus came and he died and he rose again so that I can go to heaven, right? Mm-hmm. And so many would just simplify it to that. And you can imagine what type of worldview that gives you, or what type of understanding that gives you about what this is all about. Well, I just have to believe some certain things and then I'm good in the afterlife. And the truth is that's not the biblical narrative really at all, honestly. You could say it's a small part of it, but it's really not the message. The message is that King Jesus came to earth to usher in his kingdom of love and joy and peace and healing and restoration and wholeness. And he invites us to be swept up, to be a part, to enter into that kingdom here and now. Now, of course, we're pointing to a future state of completion and new creation, but we are to live in the reality of that here and now. And so I think that points us into there's work to be done. There's transformation that's supposed to happen. We're supposed to be conformed to the image of the Son as we enter into his kingdom here and now.
Yeah. One of the, I think we've got part of, the gospel. That's the common modern Western church perspective. Like you said, we're going to say this prayer. We're going to put our belief in this. We're going to raise our hand maybe, and we're good. And I think it's 63% of Americans say that they are Christians.
Yeah.
But then only 4% say that they are a true disciple of
They're
Jesus.
actively following Jesus.
Following.
Yeah.
Which is what Jesus asked from the beginning.
That is the invitation.
Will you follow me?
Yeah.
Will you follow me in my way?
Yeah.
And man, 63% versus 4%. But I think this speaks to what we started with, is why we feel like there's got to be more.
There's more. Yeah.
There's got to be more to this.
Yeah.
And so what comes with this understanding of, no, maybe we've missed a lot of the gospel message here, is that no, we are to actively be this, step into this, to bring his kingdom to earth, that his will would truly be done. But that is through us. Yeah. And that is something that for me, it charges me up, It's like, okay, how sad and disappointing would it be if the gospel was just, all right, I said the prayer and I raised my hand and now I'm good. And now what? And instead we're saying, no, now it's game time. Now it's time to follow his ways. The things that he did, the things that he taught us, that is who we are to become. Yeah. And that is what we are to do, because he has asked us to do exactly that. Like, I'm leaving this earth. Now it's you. And again, the Holy Spirit that also empowered him to do all these miracles. He is with us to help us do the same.
Yeah. Now, I do want to call out, as we talk about spiritual practices and disciplines and the things that we do, I just want to be ultra clear, because this is always a discussion that's floating around. We are not talking about works righteousness. Yeah. We're not talking about doing things that earn us love or grace from Jesus, or earn us salvation or redemption. We're not talking about those things. Mm-hmm. We're simply talking about practices that align us with our ultimate value, which is that we love Jesus and we want to follow him. Mm-hmm. It's just centering us on that. And I don't know, anytime the whole faith versus works thing comes up, it just always brings me back to like any love relationship in your life, like a marriage relationship. Love is the core, is the center of that. And in many ways, love is everything. But then throughout that relationship, that love is going to be expressed in a variety of different ways. And if it's not, well, then you have to question if the love's even there, right? Do you even love this person? But if there's real love, then, there's going to be things that happen as a result of that. So when I give my wife a gift, or when I do some sort of act of service for her, I'm not doing that to earn her love. I'm doing that because I love her. Right. And that's an expression of that. Or if I spend time with my wife, I'm not sitting there spending time with her for brownie points. I'm sitting there so that I can listen to my wife and so that I can talk to her and we can share secrets and so that we can be united on what life is really about and how we want to live this life, right? It's an expression of love and it's aligning us with what we most value. And it's the same way with spiritual practices. We're not trying to earn anything. We're sitting with Jesus. We're becoming like Jesus because of the things we've put in place.
I love the analogy of marriage because we're talking about spiritual disciplines. So I don't set up a date night, on a monthly basis or whatever that frequency is, right? I don't put that system or that structure in place in order to find love with Tara, to your point, right? But if I don't date my wife, then I'm going to feel more disconnected with my wife, right? So like, if I don't spend time with her, if I don't talk with her, if I don't put the things in place that allow us to do those things, that leads to a connected, united love, well then, naturally, we're going to feel a little disconnected.
Yeah. It makes me think like, if I feel really disconnected with my wife and I'm like, man, we're just not on the same page. I don't feel like I know her and she knows me in this season of life. And I just go and read a bunch of books about how to be a better husband. Well, that might point me in the right direction, but my true instinct should be just to go and sit with my wife and to talk to my wife and to listen to her and to be molded and formed together. And all of a sudden there's engagement and there's connection and there's intimacy that's happening, right? And that to me is so symbolic of how we often treat our relationship with God.
How do we know that we are doing this? How do we know that we are effectively becoming more like him, spending more time with him, doing as he did and what he said? Like, how do we know?
Well, I think the ultimate test is, again, the fruit that we're producing. That's the test. And the ultimate fruit, according to Jesus, is love, right? He says the greatest commandment is to love God and to love others. And later, John will say, God is love.
Is love.
So if you're connected with God and engaged with God and growing in God, you will become a person of love. That will and must happen if you're truly abiding in him. So to me, if we're effectively walking in these spiritual practices, we are becoming a person of love. That's the ultimate test.
And I also, we're talking about bearing his fruit, abide in him, and we will bear his fruit. And so also the fruit of the Spirit, I think, is something that really helps me as a gauge of, am I becoming more and more like him?
Right.
You mentioned earlier, like patience, but kindness and gentleness, self-control, like I know that has helped me tremendously when I'm talking to the kids. I might be snapping off at the kids just because I'm frustrated, like, listen to me. But in those moments, like, there's times where I feel like, because this is now like this measurement that I'm having inside of me, like, as that happens, I feel that, like, hang on, I am not being more like him. I'm not heading in that direction. This is not loving. This is not kind. This is not gentle. This isn't even self-control. Like that is a good measurement for me. As I am engaging with people, it's a good measurement for me to know, am I heading more toward him or away? Well,
again, just going back to the practices, like, I'm thinking, if you are reading scripture every day, which is great, do that. But as a result, you're becoming more judgmental and you're becoming more prideful in your knowledge and your understanding. Well, guess what? There's a disconnect.
Yeah, man, that's good.
You're not understanding the biblical story. You're not doing it for the right reason. It's not pointing you in the right direction. Likewise, if you show up every single time the church doors are open, and yet as a result, you just feel more superior, to other people and you look down at other people,
Yeah, we missed it.
we missed it.
Mm-hmm.
So again, going back to the point, as we walk in these habits and practices, we have to be really assessing who we're becoming as a result.
Yeah.
Are we becoming more loving and more peaceful and more generous and kind, or is it pointing us in a different direction? I want to maybe talk for a moment about how we can just begin to walk in these things. Because to our point, like that's what we're trying to do is just begin to walk in these. And I know in the next episode, we'll really, really dig into that. But maybe give us an understanding of just some initial first steps we can take to actually create these rhythms and the habits that are pointing us in the way of Jesus.
The first thing is we have to create more margin in our life. I think time is the biggest obstacle for us to spend more time with him, to become more like him, and to do the things that he's calling us to do. Because we tell ourselves all the time we don't have time. And honestly, I mean, whether that's true or not,
can we just be honest? Most times that's not true.
Most of the time it's not true.
Yeah.
I mean, statistically, the average millennial spends 4 hours a day on their phone, 2 to 3 hours a day on TV. So, I mean, we're talking 6-7 hours a day on average that we are spending on those things. But yet we're so quick to just say, I'm busy. I don't have time for that. And man, like, I don't want to have an excuse that I can't be closer to Christ, which is my very purpose in life. I can't be closer to him because I just don't have time for him. And as hard as that is to even say out of my mouth, it has been the excuse that I've used many times. Sure. And I think many of us use that in our culture today because we are told to go into this like hustle culture, you know, like that's our culture. You got to grind, you got to go, you can't waste any time. You got to be productive. You got to stay efficient. You got to do this. And what we need to actually do is make some different decisions, do some self-assessing of what our life is really consumed by. Do some time assessments of what our time actually looks like.
Which is scary.
And say, you know what? Maybe I have more time than I thought. I'm just prioritizing other things over this. And when we sit back and we say, what's most important? We would all say the right answers. We have the right head knowledge. But we got to be real about how we are living our lives, what we are spending our time doing, and say, you know what? I'm sorry, I can forfeit some time on my social media feed, and I can forfeit some Netflix time, and I can forfeit sports to, you know, and I love sports, but I can forfeit some of this time to say, you know what? I must. It's not a question anymore. I must spend time with him. I must spend more time with him.
Well, I mentioned earlier, the invitation from Jesus is deny yourself. And so much of that is to deny your natural desires, and not only just sinful desires, but your desires to give your time and attention to all the things that are begging for it and calling for it. That's also what self-control is about as well, having the control to say no. I'm not giving my time and attention to that right now or anymore.
Good or bad things.
Good or bad. I'm not doing that. I'm choosing to follow Jesus, to give him my time and my attention. I think it's a good call out because when we talk about these practices, what we're not saying is, okay, here's a bunch of things to just throw onto the pile of everything else you're doing in this busy life and in your busy schedule. No, that's not what we're saying at all. What we're saying is it's time to strip away the things that we do that don't really matter, so that we have time and space for the things that really, truly do, to actually align our values and our beliefs with our schedules and with our budgets and with our time and our attention. That's what we're saying.
So I think something that would be really good for all of us to do is, like many of these things in our life, whether it's our finances with our budgets, we have these vision boards of what we want to do, or our careers, or what school we want to go to, and all these things that we have in life. We have calendars and schedules to be on top of our time and our. But what does our vision board look like when it comes to our spiritual life?
Right.
What type of thoughts have we even put into what do I want my spiritual life to look like? And then going from just the vision side of it to what are now the actual steps I can take, the plan I can put in place to now accomplish what I desire my spiritual life to look like.
Yeah.
Because admittedly, like I've done those things in other areas of my life. But that's the disciplines that we're wanting to put in place when it comes to our spiritual life, is to say, what do I want this to look like? Because I think most of us have that desire. We want that. And then as we put, that image in our mind of what we want that to look like, okay, now what are the practical steps that I can put in place? What's the structure, the system that now I can put in place to accomplish this that I want so badly for my life?
Yeah. In fact, I would just challenge everybody who's listening to this over these next 2 episodes to seriously sit down, spend time thinking about, and even writing down what your vision is of your spiritual life. Who do you want to become? What type of person do you want to become? And what type of things do you want to be given to? Mm-hmm. And then think about the daily rhythms and habits that you have to put in place to accomplish that. Like, let's be really intentional. And you know me, this is not like the type of person that I am to make checklists and all of that. I often will push against that. But I think if we're going to be really intentional about who we're becoming in this life and what we're doing, we have to do some of these things. And it's something I'm doing right now. I'm being intentional about every day. What are my rhythms? What are my habits? Because I'm telling you this right now, I want to become like Jesus.
Yeah.
I want to be like him, and I want to do the things that he did, and I want to see his kingdom come to earth in and through and around me. And that's not just going to happen accidentally.
Yeah.
I have to be intentional in this life.
I want to be more like him. I want to become like him. I want to do the things that he did, that showed us, taught us. But man, I just want to spend time with him too.
Yeah.
Just to dwell and sit with him, to just have conversation with, to have relationship with him. When I first met Tara, I got all geeked up. I got so excited. You find that girl that you have this attraction with. And I think a lot of times, I'm calling this out because I think a lot of times when we think about our spiritual lives and we tell ourselves we just can't figure it out, don't have time for it, whatever the laundry list of excuses are.
Yeah.
We do this in other areas of our life. And I thought about, man, when I first met Tara, I didn't know her the day before, and now I know her. And I want to get to know her more. I want to spend more time with her. And so what do? The very next day, everything changed.
Yeah.
I started to text. I started to call. We spent time getting to know one another in conversation. Our relationship was growing and building, and we would hang out. I would take her out on dates. I would buy her flowers and chocolates, and I would invest into our relationship in these types of ways. My structure, my system changed like that
Immediately.
because I had this desire, this longing to get to know her.
Yeah.
And in the same ways, that's what we're talking about in this relationship with Jesus. Is that I want this so bad, and I think so many of us do. I truly do. I think so many of us do, and we can. It's just a matter of being intentional and having the vision, having the plan, building this out, and stepping into it.
One of the best examples that I remember from John Mark's book that stood out to me, it was just so helpful for me. But he was talking about, if you are reading through the Sermon on the Mount, and you get into Matthew chapter 6 and you begin to read Jesus' teachings on money and possessions and wealth and consumption. And you begin to realize, wow, I'm a person of greed. I'm really greedy. Mm-hmm. I want more. I want to consume more. I want to hoard everything that I have and be closed-handed with it. Then going and listening to a sermon on generosity is a good first step. But if that's the extent of what you're doing, it's not going to change anything. Instead, what you have to do is you have to put like a ledger in your budget of generosity to purposely give to people in need, and make a goal of eventually giving away more than you're taking in, so that it frees you of that desire to just keep consuming and consuming. And then spend time with Jesus and begin to realize over time that he is more valuable than any wealth or possession you could ever have. Just being with him is the ultimate value. And then pray that he would take those desires away from you and align you with his values and with his kingdom. And then surround yourself with a community of people who are like-minded and who aren't given to materialism and consumption, but actually believe it's better to give than to receive. And as you do these things, suddenly you become a person of generosity and a person who is open-handed with everything that God has given you. You become a good steward. But guess what? It took that structure and it took those practices to get you there. And that's just the reality of this life that we live.
I do want to call out, because I'm a type of person that gets really excited about doing something new. And I can get discouraged if I don't see results quickly. And then I just fall off. And so I think it's important to call out that when we talk about incorporating these things, that it's going to take time. It's going to take time to build these practices into your life. And we're not talking about perfection. We're talking about practicing. So, it's important to know up front, this is going to take time. In fact, this is a lifelong journey that we are on. And so it is going to take time. I love that John Mark said that the difference between a black belt and a white belt is that the black belt just didn't quit. It's that they're doing the same thing. They initially had the same practices. They just kept doing it. They just kept going. And that's so true in so many aspects of our life, but spiritually certainly is the case. And so I just want to encourage everyone to continue to stick with it. Stay just with tenacity, keep going and following through with it.
I think that's a really important call out, because we live in such an instant gratification world. We have, our phones, and pretty much anything we want is at the click of a button and will be here within days, if not hours or minutes. And what has happened as a result of that is we've become really disillusioned about how life works and how transformation works. We think transformation should be a click of a button. I believe in Jesus, he's my Lord and Savior. Boom, click of a button, we're changed forever. And that's just not the reality of life. Life is, you believe something and then you begin to walk in it. And over the course of your entire lifetime, you become the person that you want to be. And so that's what we're talking about. It's slow, it's steady, but it's also transformation. It's change. You become like Jesus. You do the things that he did, and you watch as his kingdom comes to earth. All right. Well, as you guys know, at the end of each episode, we like to do something a little bit more fun, a little bit more light. And so we've been doing these different drafts. Episode 1 was our favorite athlete. Episode 2, best fast food French fry. So we've hit the food, we've hit the sports. Let's maybe just take it back to the Bible.
All right.
And maybe show some of our ideas or opinions on our favorite book of the Bible. So we've got 66 options, right? So we'll just go back and forth a couple of different times, but I'll give you the number 1 overall pick. What is the best book or your favorite book of the Bible?
All right, so I'm going with Romans. Romans is so chock full of so much good. And just the grace, it's just so good. So Romans, my son's named Roman. There might be a little something into that, but that's probably number 1 for me.
Which is probably the most common number 1 overall pick, the most theologically dense book
I had to
of
take
the Bible.
I had to take it up top.
It was the obvious one. All right, for me, I'm going to say the Gospel of John. That's one that has always been really special to me. I love the synoptic gospels, but John just has his own flair, and we get to see some different stories about Jesus. But to see somebody who has spent so much time with Jesus and was one of those people talking about spiritual practices who clearly prioritized just being with Jesus, to see his perspective and the way that he viewed Jesus and the way that he felt like Jesus viewed him is just such a special book.
That was my number 2.
Yeah.
So I am going to go with, I think I'm going Genesis.
Yeah.
Genesis, there's a couple different reasons. I think there's so much more that I'm learning in that I've never really just been enlightened to, that I'm really enjoying. Obviously, there's so many amazing stories in Genesis, so I'll go Genesis.
Well, I'm going to follow that up with Exodus.
Okay.
Because so much of the biblical narrative goes back to Genesis and Exodus.
Yeah.
I mean, it sets up really so many of the themes and narratives, and so many of the things that Jesus later accomplished in the Gospels just tie back to those 2 books. And I mean, we get Moses and everything that he was about and everything that he accomplished. To me, that's one that stands out big.
Yeah. There's so much in there that's been lighting me up lately. So that's good. So third one, last one.
Let's make this the last one.
Okay, last one. I'm gonna go Proverbs.
Oh, okay.
So that, I don't know if that makes sense to you. For me, but Proverbs, I just like how succinct and like it's just very well laid out. Like I've been reading that with Roman regularly at night.
Yeah.
Leaning into, when you obey your parents. No.
Right.
But it's just so like direct and like, this is it. That I just like that about Proverbs.
And so much to reflect on, right? Like it just makes you think very deeply.
Talking about shaping you, you know.
Yeah, that's a good one. Geez. I mean, we, feel like we're leaving so many out,
for sure.
Right?
We're going to get reamed on that.
But I think I'm going to end with the book of Acts.
Yep.
And I'll be honest, throughout my history, I've had a touch and go relationship with the book of Acts.
Yeah.
And I'm not exactly sure why, to be honest. But more recently, as I've studied it, geez.
Great.
So many amazing stories. And you just see the genesis of the church and what the church should be about and the things the church should be doing. And of course, it is the entryway for the Apostle Paul, who's like such a shaping force for my life and my understanding. Yeah. Such an amazing transformational book.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining us in episode 3.
Yeah.
Thank you also so much for your feedback. It's really helpful to hear from you. This podcast thing is new to us, so it was really encouraging and really helpful to hear your feedback. So please continue to share with us. Also, please like, subscribe, share with your friends and your family, because we just want this to help. Like ultimately, we just want this to help. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Next episode, we are going to be continuing the discussion on spiritual practices. As we alluded to, we're going to be getting into some of the specific practices in our lives that we can be given to, what they're about, how we can actually walk in them, and we're going to be inviting an awesome guest to join us in that conversation. So love you guys. We will see you next episode.
Love you.